Hello and welcome to another video from AGIS Associates. In this video we're going to talk about how to create an index to use with data-driven pages using the Grid Index Features tool found in ArcToolbox. So if you're not familiar with data-driven pages, we did a previous video discussing this topic that I'll provide a link to in the description below so you can learn a little bit more about data-driven pages and how to configure them. But generally speaking, data-driven pages is a function inside of ArcMap that allows you to generate a map book or a map atlas based on an index. The index is used to determine the pages that will be in the map book or the atlas. And there's several different types of indexes that you can use. You can do a regular grid index. You can do a regular strip index. Or you can do an irregular index. And you can use any and all of these, and it doesn't matter which license level you have, whether it's basic, standard, advanced, you can access the data-driven page functionality. But at the core of that is the index. You've got to have something that designates the pages that are going to end up being in your atlas or your map book. So this index being so important, how do you create it if you don't, if you don't have one or you're not sure or whatnot? Well, the easiest thing is to take some existing polygon layer you already have that kind of forms a grid, like the sections in the public land system, or in the state of Georgia we don't have the public land system, but the western 2/3 of the state does have things called land lots, which are in theory square, rectangular-ish. It could be city blocks. It could be something based off, say, your old tax map grid. It could be any polygon layer that kind of forms a standard shape grid, rectangular or square in nature, that you can use. If you don't have anything, there are tools in ArcMap that are in ArcToolbox that allow you to generate a new feature class from scratch based on some input. So if you go inside of ArcToolbox, you look in the cartography toolbox, and under the data-driven page tool set, you'll see two tools in there that create indexes. The first is the Grid Index Features tool. This is going to create a rectangular grid that form a series of rows and columns based on that grid. Then you have the Strip Map Index Feature tool. It's going to create a series of polygons that follow along specified linear features. That can be road center lines, that could be gas mains, that could be power line, could be road, any sort of linear feature that you have selected. It can be for the entire layer or specific features. But those are going to follow and kind of rotate around based on the orientation of that linear feature in the area that index covers. So it's a little bit fairly fancy tool, does some pretty amazing things. But what we want to do is really focus on the grid index, because it's by far the simplest to create if you don't already have one. So that's what we're going to do. Before you start running the tool, though, there are some things you need to start thinking about before you go to create that index. And some of these are interdependent with one another. So what is your page size going to be, right? Is it going to be tabloid? Is it going to be letter size? Is it going to be architectural D or C or something else? So you got to figure out what the page size is. You also kind of need to determine what the orientation of that page is going to be. Is it going to be landscape or portrait? That's going to help kind of define what shape you need the index polygons to be. Do they need to be tall and narrow, or wide and short, or something like that? Also going along with that is your desired map scale. What scale do you need, at least roughly, to be able to see the level of detail that you need to see for the purpose of the map? And that is something, too, that you need to think about, is what's the overall purpose and who's going to be using this. Is it going to be something that dispatchers are going to be using in a 911 center? Is it something that field crews are going to be using out in the field to locate, say, a water main break or something along those lines? All that's going to help determine the level of detail you need, because The more detail you need to see, the bigger the scale needs to be, right? You need to be able to see a lot more information in there. And again, that's going to determine how big or small that index grid needs to be. The more detail you need to see, the smaller each one of those tiles in the index you're going to create have to be. So you need to think that through. And then, of course, how much space in your layout are you actually going to have for the map view? Because that's also going to help you determine what scale is possible, and then allow you to size things accordingly. So, and if there are other components you need, like, do you need a north arrow, a scale, legends, all those, where are those going to be in there to help figure out all that? So again, all of this kind of needs to be done before you start really creating that index. So now we're going to go into the actual tool itself. So here you see a screenshot of the Grid Index Features tool. The first thing you've got to do is specify the output. This tool does create a new feature class. Now that can be a new geodatabase feature class, or it can be a shapefile. It really just depends on where you choose to save it. If you pick a folder to save it in, then it's going to be a shapefile. If you pick a geodatabase to save it in, it's going to be a geodatabase feature class. It'll do either. It's entirely up to you. Below that, next is input features. And this is optional. You do not have to specify any input features. But what this does allow you to do, if you do specify input features, is check the box that's just below that, which says generate polygon grids that intersect the input feature layers or data sets. So this helps kind of automate the tool a little bit, because you check that box, and then it's going to make sure it generates polygons in the index grid that you're creating that cover all the features that are in those input layers. So this can kind of give you a head start and make sure you don't have to kind of calculate everything like the X and Y coordinates for the grid origin and those kind of things. So if you're creating this map atlas or map book for a specific, say, system, like the sewer system or the gas system, or you want to show everything that's inside the city limits, then in any of those cases you probably want to set your input features. So if I'm creating a map atlas or a map book for the sewer system, I'm going to set my input features to all the layers that deal with the sewer system, the sewer lines, the manholes, the lift stations, the water treatment plants, and so on, so that I guarantee I get a index polygon over all of those features. So they show up in the maps, in the map atlas, right? So I get everything. I don't leave anything out. Okay, so we can choose that option. Like I said, if you're just making a common grid that's going to cover everything, then you don't necessarily have to select those input features. It's up to you. Now, kind of skipping down below the first checkbox, which is grayed out, the generate polygon grid option. Below that is use page, unit, and scale. Again, this is optional, but what this does, if you check that box where you see map scale below it, it's going to allow you to go ahead and specify your specific scale, such as the 1 to 1200 that I want to use. And then it's going to set the units, the polygon width down below that, and height. Instead of decimal degrees, it's going to set it to use page units. And since I already know when I added that data frame into my layout and set the size at 10 inches by 15 inches, it's going to go ahead and, I can go ahead and specify that in there, right? Go ahead and do that. So it makes it a little easier. You don't have to calculate anything. So if you've already done that stage, check the box. Then you're pretty much ready to go. Okay, so below that, below the map scale, you'll see polygon width, polygon height. You can go in, and if you know the height and the width you want, either in decimal degrees, map units, or page units, again, you can go ahead and type those in as well. Below that, you would specify the origin. So this is where you want to start the numbering from, where you want it to create the first one, the X and Y coordinate for that. And then below that, you can set the number of rows or columns. Now, if you set the polygon height and width, then it will not always allow you to set the row and column if you're setting it to generate the grid that intersects the features. So some of these kind of work in conjunction with one another, and if you set one, it won't allow you to set the other. But we'll see that here in a minute when we do a live demonstration of that. And then lastly, at the bottom is the your starting page number. So if you want something other than 1, if you want to start with 10 or 12, and you may want to do something different than 1 if you think in the future you may need to add some additional tiles into the index or additional polygons that may need to be added before where number 1 would be. So you kind of need to think that through as well. Anyway, this is kind of the rough idea of the various inputs that you can provide in this tool. So that, it's time to go in and take a look at this thing in action and actually show you how some of this works in real life. So we're going to bump over here into ArcMap and demonstrate the tool. Okay, so I'm now over here in ArcMap, and you can see I've got some data in here. I'm going to create a map book for my sewer system. So I've got the city data pulled in, I've got city limits, I've got parcels, I've got road right-of-ways or edge of pavements in there, and then I've got my sewer system consisting of my sewer lines and my manholes. So this is what I want to create the index for, is to generate a map book for the sewer system. So what I like to do when I'm going to be setting up an index, once I've got my layers added in so I can kind of see the overall positioning and relationships between the layers, is go in and start looking at my layout. So I'm going to go into layout view now. So here you can see I'm in layout view, and I've gone ahead and set up a page size. In this case, I'm using, as you can see, 11 by 17 or tabloid page size. I've selected this because I'm designing this to be used by the field crews of the sewer system. So they need to carry this in their trucks. And I have found over years and years of working in the field and with various field crews and whatnot, that 11 by 17 or that tabloid size works really well in the trucks. It's not too big that it takes up a lot of space, but it is big enough that they can see enough detail to be able to do their jobs. So that's why I've chosen 11 by 17 in this case. The other thing I've done is I've chosen a landscape versus portrait orientation because of the overall layout of my data. We can see that the city limits that are shown here in the dark kind of dashed line are a little bit wider than they are tall. And while the sewer system is primarily limited to the east side of the city, there may be some expansion out into some of these other residential neighborhoods, and potentially even out into areas outside the city that may not have service from the county. So knowing that, I'm going to keep it in this landscape orientation because that's going to allow for future growth as the sewer system potentially expands. So that's the first decision that I've made. So the next thing, I want to be able to see enough detail where I could see all the manhole locations in relation to the parcels in the streets, as well as the sewer lines. But in the future, I also want to be able to see where my service laterals are coming from and whatnot. And I have found that 1 to 1200 works really well for that. Now that also equals, for those of us here in the United States, 1 inch equals 100 feet, which is a pretty common scale. Here in the US, we really like to use 1 inch equals so many feet as a scale factor, because then we can use a traditional ruler, a foot-long ruler that most people have, to be able to guesstimate or estimate distances within the printed map. I know if you're not in the US, you're not going to use 1 inch equal anything. You're going to be a lot better off because you'll be using the metric system, and it's all easy factors of 100, 1,000, or 10, that kind of thing. So it makes it a lot easier when working with scale in the metric system. But here I'm in the US, so I get to deal with feet and inches and yards and miles and all those kind of things. So I said, I know that 1 to 1200 is the same as 1 inch equals 100 feet, and that's a very doable scale. So I've kind of worked that out in my head. Where did I come up with that? Why did I say 1 inch equals 100 feet or 1 to 1200? That's honestly just my experience. I know that works well for me for the level of detail I need to show. If I have a lot of detail, for example, if I'm working with electrical systems and I've got to show a lot of detail that's on each power pole with the transformer, the various phases that are coming in and out, the various service connections and whatnot, then I might want to go with a bigger scale, like 1 inch equals 50 feet, or that would be 1 to 600, right? In traditional card graphic scale. So you've got to kind of figure those things out for yourself, figure out what scale you need it to be. So since I've got all that worked out, I'm ready to go to start creating my index. So I'm going to go over here to Arc Toolbox, which I already have open. If you don't have Arc Toolbox open, you can just go to this button up here to open it. So I've got it open. I'll go ahead and pin it in place for the moment so it stays open. And you'll see here's the Cartography Tools toolbox. And then if I expand the Data-Driven Pages tool set right here, you just, if it's not expanded, you click on the little plus sign there, opens it up. And here you can see there's the Grid Index Features tool. That's the one we want to use. Notice there's a bunch of other tools in here we may talk about in future videos. If you'd like to see videos about some of these other tools, please make sure to leave us a comment below and we'll see what we can do for you. So I'm going to double click on the Grid Index Features to open up the tool. So it opens up here, looks very much like the screenshot we were looking at earlier. So the first thing I'm going to do is set my output. Where is this going to go? I can click over here to my Browse button and choose where I want this to go. So I can go into any geodatabase. If I just want to go into a folder, right? I can just go up here and navigate to the folder I want it to go on. I'm going to put it in my home folder. And we'll call this Sewer Index Grid. Okay. Now, notice I don't have any spaces in here. I tend not to do that because if this was actually going into a geodatabase, this is creating a new table or a new feature class, and they can't have spaces in the name itself. This will be a shapefile because I'm going into a folder. It wouldn't necessarily matter then. I just tend to not use spaces when I name things just because it can cause conflicts elsewhere. So that's just a habit I've gotten into. Underscores work as well. Let me just click Save to that. So it's going to go there and you can see it automatically made it a shapefile because it's going into a folder. Now because I'm going to make this for my sewer system, right, I'm going to go ahead and add, if I click the drop down and go ahead and add my sewer system, pick that group. I'm sorry, going to pick the manholes and pick the sewer lines. So I've got that in there. And because I want to go ahead and create the grid so it allows for future expansion, I'm going to add the city limits. Now also notice down here that by adding these input layers, it went ahead and calculated my grid origin X and Y coordinates. I don't have to manually calculate it. That's one of the advantages of applying input features. So like I said, I'm also going to do my city limits just so I've got all of the city covered, at least for now, so I don't have to worry about adding additional grid tiles later. So now that I've added those, the Generate Polygrid that intersects input features layer option is selected. So it's going to generate grids only where those input features are. If I want to, I can uncheck that and it'll just generate all of them even if there's nothing there. So I'll leave that checked for now. If I check Use Page Unit Scale, notice when I do that, that this map scale pops up and that this changed from decimal degrees to inches, right? And that 15 by 10 is fitting with the size of my map frame right here. Now it read the scale. You'll notice this scale and this scale up here are the same, right? So I wanted it to 1200, 1 to 1200, so I'm going to pop that in there. Now notice when I hit enter what happens down here. Let me hit enter. I can actually click off. Notice it automatically calculated the number of rows and columns that I needed for this purpose, right? So it automatically calculated based off the scale and the width here, and the origin that it needs to cover and figure that out. Okay. Now, if I didn't, I'm going to uncheck this box for a moment and go back. That kind of clears everything out. So if I didn't check the box, right? So it kept the numbers that were in here, but now I can go in. If I change this, again, I can go into inches, which would be my page units, if I wanted to. Notice I'm getting warnings over here when I do that. And that's inappropriate with the options. That's because I don't have that checked. So I'm going to go off inches and go into feet. Now that goes away. I say 15,000. Sorry, 1,500 by 1,000 in there. Okay. Notice then that it again calculates the columns and rows. Now I can alternatively go down here and change this, the rows and columns. Oops, I hit enter and it's going ahead and running it. I didn't mean to do that. But it ran it and created my index grid successfully based on those settings. You can see it's very wide. I did not mean to do that. So I'm going to remove that and rerun the tool because that's not going to work. So rerun it. Go back to here, go back to here and select the yes, I want to overwrite it. Need to verify my, yep, there it is. Options allow for overwriting of options, so I may have to rerun the tool now that I've changed that setting. Okay, back to here, keep coming over. There we go. Yep, okay, so notice now it's just giving me a warning that's going to overwrite as opposed to the X I got before. That's because I changed that under geoprocessing and options. There's this overwrite the output of geoprocessing operations. That box was not checked originally. So you want to make sure in this situation that that box is checked so I can overwrite an existing file there. The other thing I like to do, and this is kind of a side note, is for when I'm running geoprocessing tools in ArcMap, I disable this background processing. And I do that because I have encountered many problems running various geoprocessing tools if that function is enabled. When I disable it, I have a lot less problems. So if you're having issues trying to run various geoprocessing tools and they don't work, you may want to try disabling that like I just did. So I'll click OK. Okay, so my input features, go back and choose those again because back to my city limits. Okay, and I'm just going to go the easy way since I've already shown you the others. Set that, so it's got that, and so set my map scale to 1200. That's the same as 1 inch equals 100. Leave that in there. Got my number of rows and columns good. Sure, I'll start numbering at page 1 and go OK. So bada bing, bada boom. There we go. It is completed. I'm going to close the window out. And now the purple polygons you see are that index. And if I open the attribute table, you can see that several fields were auto-generated. So obviously the shape, there's the FID for the feature ID, page name and page number. So page name is the row and column, much like an Excel spreadsheet. Cell is identified and then just individual numbers. So you can use either one of these however you want to go about it. So I've got my index created. From there, I could go in with my data-driven pages toolbar turned on and enable this functionality. So I'm going to use the sewer grid. There we go. So field name, for that would be the page name. Sort field would be my page number. Again, if I wanted to make them the same, I could sort either way. Sort ascending. Set the page number to be the page number here. My extent. I've already set this up so that the right scale should fit in there at 100%. Click OK. So I've now enabled my data-driven pages. I'm going to turn off the toolbox so you can see it. And with that, now I can go through and cycle through, and I'm going to move the index down here at the bottom so you can actually see the stuff. So you can see it's moving through, and then from there I go in and start configuring all the other things, adding things like the page name in there so it appears here, configuring it. Set this up so this will auto number. Set the page size, say, let's say 18. Apply that. So I've got my map number appearing down here in the book. So as I notice it says B6, as I cycle through to C1, it's updating that number automatically for me in there. Now, because I had the city limits, we go back to data view and zoom out really quickly. So you can see that this grid that was created covers more than just the sewer lines because I selected the city limits as one of the input layers. So this means it already has pages for areas that currently don't have sewer service in them, but those pages then can be added. Well, they're already here. They're already incorporated. So as the sewer expands into these areas, I've already got maps set up for them. So I don't have to recreate the index every time I do that. If I had not added the city limits in there, then it would have just created it for the area where the sewer system was. Okay. Did I have to put the sewer system in there as an input feature? Not in this case, because it looks like the city limit, or I'm sorry, the sewer system is confined to the inside the city limits, so I wouldn't have to do that. But if your system went outside, if they extended outside the city limits some, then certainly you'd want to add those. So with that, this is pretty much how you go about creating that index to use with your data-driven pages. I hope that's been helpful and gives you a better idea of how you can go about creating your own index. These are just one of the many ways you can do that. Please keep us in mind if you need any help with your enterprise GIS or any sort of GIS implementation, or maybe you're trying to figure out how to expand your GIS and you need a strategic plan or a needs assessment, or maybe you're trying to figure out how to implement ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Enterprise. We can certainly help you with that. We can also help you with some Rent-A-Tech services. So if you need some sort of staffing assistance, whether it's helping with data updates, map creation, analysis, or whatnot, we can certainly help you with that. And of course, we provide training and support as well. So if you need any help with your GIS, please feel free to reach out to us. We are very familiar with the Esri products. We are a ArcGIS Online and Release Ready specialty partner with the Esri, but we're not just limited to the Esri product line. We do know a little bit about some open source other things as well, but primarily focus here on Esri products. So with that, please feel free to contact us. Our website is www.egisassociates.com. Give us a call at 678-710-9710 or email us at info@egis.com, and we'd love to hear from you. If you really like what you see, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button. That's the little bell once you subscribe. That way you'll be notified every time we post a new video, and we've been trying to add new videos at least a couple of times a month, if not more, up here, so do that. If the contents in the video were very helpful to you, make sure to give it a like. If there was something you didn't like, you can give it a thumbs down too. Make sure you leave comments too, so if there was something in here that's unclear, you have another question about, put that in the comments. If there's another video topic you'd like to see, put that in the comments. We really look forward to hearing from you. If you'd like to really help support the channel even more, you can join us through Patreon. Become a subscriber in Patreon, and you get some stuff for doing that. As well as check out our merchandise store there, so you can get an EGIS t-shirt or a mouse pad or things like that. So with that, we look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks.